There are few people in the world, usually, that are more important than your parents. They're the ones who brought you up, that take care of you, and if they're actually good parents, are the reason for who we are today. While dads are there, often with life advice and the occasional bad joke, it's usually moms who are considered to be the major influence on a lot of people's lives. And in media, finding a good mom is sometimes harder than you think, mostly because most moms either end up not being important for the story, or usually 6 feet under. So let's change things up for this Mother's Day, as I'm wanting to talk about the top 10 moms in media. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am your ever-friendly Pokeprof, and welcome back to Fascinating Fiction. So, like other top 10s on this channel, a couple of ground rules before we get into the full swing of things. The main rule here is that I'm not just going to be talking about mothers, but mother figures as well. These characters don't actually have to be related to the kids they're looking after, but are fulfilling the role of being a caring parental figure that wants the best for them. Because as far as I'm concerned, a female role model that looks after you, takes care of you, and has no romantic ties with you is a mom. The second rule here is the fact that these characters are ones that I have personally been exposed to, and ones that I have related to. This means that if you like, say, Sue Storm from the Marvel Comics and think she should be on this list, I'm sorry, I've never really read the comics, so she's not gonna really be on here. And to follow up on that, keep in mind this is my list. I'll do my best to give my reasoning for why I ranked them the way I did, but otherwise this is just a fun video for Mother's Day. With all that said, let's get into the countdown. Number 10. Lorelai Gilmore from Gilmore Girls. I'll be 100% honest, I am not a Gilmore Girls fan. I've seen the entire series, having watched it with my family, and while very decent, I wasn't into the whole constant dramatic moments in sitcom-like situations that the characters often found themselves in. Weird shifts in writing thanks to actors leaving in some seasons also didn't help matters. But with all that said, there's one particular reason Lorelai makes it on here and why I'm mentioning Gilmore Girls at all. Because they kind of broke the mold. Back in the 90s, a lot of TV shows, especially live action stuff that had a sitcom appeal, tended to focus on the nuclear family. One dad, one mom, 2.5 kids, with a pet often thrown into the mix. It's the reason why The Simpsons are the way they are, because it was such a common thing that you could see it just about everywhere. Then comes Gilmore Girls, starring Lorelai, who's not only a single mother, but one who had a child at the age of 16 and out of wedlock. Seeing that on public TV was almost unheard of, and when it was shown, it was usually done with the main characters of most sitcoms shaking their heads and going for shame, or oh how sad for them. Instead, Lorelai here shows herself to be reasonably strong, if a chaotic woman, who goes out of her way to help her daughter. It gets to the point where one of the major driving points of the earlier seasons is Lorelai swallowing her pride and asking her rich parents for help and making sure her daughter goes to a good school. And while this kind of mom is a bit more common in media these days, Lorelai was among one of the first, and that's more than enough for her to take the number 10 spot on this list. Number 9. Charlotte from Charlotte's Web. There are a couple of different adaptations of the famous children's book Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, but there's one in particular that I'm drawing on here, the 1973 Hanna-Barbera version of the story. For those unfamiliar with the basic story, it focuses on Wilbur, a pig who's the runt of the litter that, after initially becoming the pet of a farmer's daughter, is eventually sold off. When discovering that pigs are often just useful for being turned into food, Wilbur despairs until we reach the mom of the movie, Charlotte A. Kavatica. Throughout the film, Charlotte does her best to encourage Wilbur, cheering him up through song and friendship, and goes out of her way to spin words in her web so that the farmer that owns Wilbur at that point, Zuckerman, won't kill him. It's not just what she's willing to do for the pig though that makes her such a good mom. It's the fact that she's willing to give up on certain things for him, including not eating as she normally would to ease Wilbur's sensitive emotions. That alone would make her an awesome awesome mom, but it's the end of the movie that really puts her over the top, that makes her one of the most important moms in all of media for me. Her final moments of the film are singing a reprise of the song Mother Earth and Father Time, which is all about the wonderful aspect of life and how precious it is that we live in it. And she's doing this to cheer up Wilbur even as her strength leaves her in the last few notes as she passes away. Especially for a kid movie that had been, up to that point, mostly bright and bouncy with how it presented itself, this song hits hard. Hell's bells, I rewatched this movie for this video to make sure I got things right, and I still teared up at this bit. And while it said that E.B. White didn't care much for the film, most particularly the music, I think it's a testament to his writing and the beauty of the song that can make a grown man cry. And yes, I am not afraid to admit that I can cry over the death of a cartoon spider from a movie made back in the 70s. Number 8. Morticia Addams from the Addams Family. The Addams Family is all about being the oddballs. The whole joke about them is to be the parody of the popular nuclear family, which just shows how long that idea has been around if these characters have been around since the early 30s, and it was the late 90s before we started really getting past that particular character setup. Regardless, despite being as mysterious and spooky as their theme song describes, Morticia has perhaps been the most traditional of the characters portrayed in most forms of media. Just as her love for Gomez makes the two a wonderful pairing, Morticia is the kind of character who is always there for her kids. While she doesn't get that much focus compared to some of the other moms on this list, mostly because either the kids or Fester are usually made the focus of their media, Morticia is one of those moms that's shown to be a strong pillar not only for the kids, but for the family as a whole. She shows compassion and concern whenever something odd comes to her family, which in the case of the Addams is almost always something that we would see as normal, and she never rushes to a conclusion, instead wishing to understand just what her brood has gotten themselves into this time. Unlike the rest of the moms on this list, you can really take your pick on which version that you would like to see on here, though frankly I almost always default to the 1991 version of Morticia. There are a few other moms, however, that look after the kids, care for them, and tries to raise them up to be the best psychopaths they can be. Number 7. Kyoko Honda from Fruits Basket. This is perhaps the most interesting mom on this list because of one simple fact. She's dead before the series even starts. And in most forms of media, that's usually where things stop for us learning about the character's parents when we have been told that they've passed away. Look at any other popular movie or TV series, dead moms or dead parents are usually the extent we ever learn about them. But it's just that which makes Kyoko stand out all the more. Unlike so many other series where mom's death is usually saved for a dramatic moment, Fruit Basket instead uses Toru's loss of a mother as a way to teach the lessons Toru's learned and the memories she cherishes. Entire episodes of this anime are dedicated to Toru remembering what her mother did when she was little, often using those lessons of the past to help the Soma family move on with their own lives. What's more is just how much of her own life and how being a mother resulted in us learning about Kyoko. From her time as the gang member known as the Red Butterfly to her whirlwind romance with her late husband, we get into details of just what makes her tick and how she became the mother that Toru speaks of so fondly. We aren't sad that we never get a proper meeting with Kyoko in the anime because Toru clings to her memory so fiercely and holds it with her wherever she goes that it's impossible not to see the influence of Kyoko Honda. Number 6. Della Duck from DuckTales 2017. Out of all the characters on this list, Della's probably got the most interesting history. Originally just a side character first mentioned in the cartoon short Donald's Nephews back in 1938, she was never given that much of a background. Just an absentee parent who's never around and was mostly just there to serve as a joke for why Donald had to deal with his triplet nephews of Huey, Dewey, and Louie. It wouldn't be until Donald's 80th birthday that she was given a new history and identity, and that one would carry on into the 2017 cartoon. A pilot by nature, Della had an adventurous spirit that was only matched by her brother Donald and their uncle Scrooge. It was this that got her into trouble, as she takes advantage of a spaceship that Scrooge had originally built for her as a surprise and went out into space, only to become stranded there. Trust me, it makes about as much sense as a DuckTale cartoon canon context. Either way, for the next 10 years in the show's time, she's doing her best to get home to her kids, who are about to hatch when she gets lost in space. What makes Della such a good mom, though, is the flat-out amount of love she has for her kids. She doesn't let anything stop her from trying to get back to her family, be it losing a leg, dealing with moon monsters, or the fact that she spent 10 years sending messages and recordings to her kids, only for them to never be received. Once she's back in Season 2, she's very much lost out of time, now having kids approaching the ages of teenagers. She's having to learn how to be around them, what their likes and dislikes are, and even their names, considering Donald named them different from what she had originally intended.
I could have been Turbo!
Despite this and her more laid-back nature, when faced with the possibility in the end of the second season that she might lose them again, she will do anything to keep them safe. There is so much about the 2017 DuckTales that makes it fantastic, and I'm really only mentioning just a small part of it, so that might be something I talk about more detail in the future. Number 5. Your Forger from Spy X Family. We've talked about the anime Spy X Family before, but we've got an awesome mom in there, so we're going to be putting it on the list. For those who don't recall, the anime is one of the best found family series around, with a focus on being a spy who's trying to prevent a war, a young psychic who's got a thirst for adventure, an assassin who's trying to keep up an appearance of a normal life, all living together. What makes Yor, though, such a great mother is just how deadly serious she's willing to take her job as a parent. Here's this little girl who isn't her own, not even part of a real marriage as far as both herself and Lloyd are concerned, and yet she's trying her all to care for Anya as much as she can. From teaching her all the life lessons, as out of place as an assassin's lessons might be for a 4-year-old, to threatening bodily harm on anyone who dares threatens Anya, it's clear to see just how much she cares for her little girl. The only reason Yor doesn't really get all that much higher on the list is mostly because she's kind of forgotten when compared to Anya and Lloyd's own adventures, and unlike the other two, her assassin nature isn't really brought up all that much, other than to show off the fact that she's got enough strength and skill to threaten just about anybody else in the cast. It does leave her feeling at times to be more of an extended extra instead of a full-fledged character, but then we get those rare instances of Yor going all mama bear that makes it all worth it. She's an awesome mom, someone who's got the skills, abilities, and desire to improve to be the most caring mother to her little girl. Number 4. Ida and Camilla from the Owl House. We've got a case of double the moms here for both number 4 and number 3, but it's because the series we're talking about have awesome moms and I didn't want them to take up 4 different spots on the list. We've talked about the Owl House before and some of its impact thanks to the thank you video, but let's really delve deep into what makes both Ida and Camilla tick. The Owl Lady herself is one of the best adoptive mothers in media, and what's perhaps one of the most interesting ones because she grows into the role of a mother throughout the series. When we first meet her, Ida's very much a scam artist and not exactly someone who's there to be responsible. It's as the show goes on, though, that she grows, becoming more caring, more motherly, and does her best to look after not only just Luce, but King as well, eventually adopting the little guy as her official son. It's amazing to see her go from someone who couldn't care about being responsible in the slightest to someone who's willing to sacrifice just about anything for her kids. As a counterpoint, Camilla is actually shown as a less than impressive mother at the start of the series, what with her pushing Luce into the camp that would make her a bit more normal. We still know that she's a good mom since Luce is still attached to her, but our first impression is less than stellar. It's as we get into season 3 of the series that we see the reason for her actions from that first episode, and just how much she grows. taking in all the kids from the demon realm after they get locked into the human one, Camila goes from caring just for one kid to becoming a mother of 6. What's more is that we can see her doing her best in the first episode of Season 3, doing things like clipping coupons and looking for sales just to make sure she can keep all the kids fed and taken care of. Of course, what makes her a much better mom is how she decides to sacrifice her own desires when she sees just how much her daughter has come to love the demon realm and how much it fits her. And how, in her own words,
"My biggest mistake was trying to protect you by changing this beautiful, good witch."
It's one thing for a mom to already be a capable and loving person. It's another for them to admit that they were wrong and to adapt to how their child grows. It's the reason why Camila here is about on the same level for me as the Owl Lady, and why I wish we got to see the two moms interacting a bit more in the series. Thanks for that early ending, by the way, Disney. Before we truly get into the next pair of moms, I'm wanting to give a heads up warning here. Out of all the different series we've talked about on this channel, Final Fantasy XIV is one of those games where people are really big on not spoiling things for new players. And while I'm going to be doing my best to be as generic as possible so not to ruin any of the story beats, the characters I'm going to be talking about here are in Shadowbringers and Endwalker respectively. So if for whatever reason you're not wanting to get spoiled whatsoever, I am making a timestamp so you can skip this one and go straight to number 2. We good? Alright then. Number 3. Dulia Chai and Emilians from Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV is one of those games, being an MMO, that you can really see having grown over the years. Originally something that was just aping World of Warcraft from its heyday, it's now become one of the biggest MMOs on the market that's unrivaled in storytelling, characters, and treating its players with respect and care. But it's not until the third expansion, Shadowbringers, that the themes of family really become important. Before this point, the Scions of the Seventh Dawn, the main group of characters that the player associates with, are more colleagues and allies. It's this expansion that we truly start feeling like a family. This is helped by the character of Dulia Chai, a woman of high standing within one of the game's cities that we get to know as we try to stop the end of the world, as you do. While being more of a side character and a comedic one at that, Dulia here latches on to Alphino, one of our closest allies, and dotes on him relentlessly because she thinks he's cute. Eventually it becomes a bit more motherly as the story goes on, with Dulia actually worrying greatly not just about his safety, but that of the player and the rest of the Scions. What makes her such a fantastic mother, though, is just how attached she gets to Alphino. What starts as a silly character whose joke is the fact that she's a large woman, goes and develops into a character who's moved to tears when the story of Shadowbringers ends, and the characters have to move on, knowing that this would be cutting their ties to Dulia because of story-related stuff. And though heartbroken by the fact that she will likely never see Alphino again, Dulia makes it known just how much she loves him and that he will always be in her thoughts. Emilians, by the counterpoint, is Alphino's actual mom. While she doesn't get anywhere near as much screen time as Dulia gets, we see that she cares for her kids' well-being enough that she is willing to go behind the back of her husband to ensure their safety and support. Even with what little time we get to spend with her is done showing that she's one of the major supporters of the Scions since the start of the game, and there's a gentleness of the character that shows just how much she cares. It's a little sad that she doesn't get to show this off as much as Dulia did, but it's still worth a spot on the countdown as far as I'm concerned. Number 2. Chili from Bluey. So let me start off by saying that this is one of the cutest shows I have ever seen, and if you've not watched Bluey yet, do yourself a favor and sit down and watch a handful of episodes. They're short, they're sweet, and it shows off one of the best pair of parents I have seen in this side of animation. But it being Mother's Day, let's actually focus on Chili, the mother figure in Bluey. Bluey as a show is already fairly unique as a cartoon aimed at preschool kids because of just how much it treats the kids with respect and intelligence. It never shies away from the more serious or dour subjects, but always tries to present them through the lens of understanding and patience. Chili is the embodiment of those concepts, as she's always the one who's going to sit down with her kids, offering them a helping hand and asking them just what went wrong. What's amazing is the fact that this is also among one of the first times I've seen a mother in any form of media that has been shown to be stern and willing to discipline both of her children and her husband without going overboard into controlling or abusive territory that so many other mothers in media fall into. Part of this probably does come from the lighthearted nature of the show, to be sure, but Chili is often depicted as a reservoir of patience that has a clear point where she'll step up, be a parent, but does so in a way her children understand how she wants them to act while not forcing them to be her little robots. Between that and the clear love she has for her kids, Chili easily makes the number 2 spot on this list. Some honorable mentions before we get to the number 1. Princess Rosalina from Mario Galaxy. Being the mother to several dozen hungry star children probably isn't easy, but the Princess of Space does it very well, often being shown reading a story to the Lumas. Mostly doesn't make the list proper thanks to the fact that Miyamoto, the creator of most things Mario, isn't a huge story guy, and Rosalina has been a side character like Princess Daisy or Waluigi since this game. Always in Mario Kart, never a main character. Mrs. Honey from Matilda. Another awesome adoptive mother, Mrs. Honey's main thing is the fact that she's patient, soft-spoken, and the kind of doting mother who would likely smother her kids. The perfect counterbalance to the mean and cruel Trenchbull that we see in most versions of the story. It's that softness, however, that is the reason that she's here instead of on the list proper, because she takes a massive backseat to Matilda herself, and is in many ways just the reward for the little girl at the end. An awesome mom, but one that needs more focus. Elastigirl from The Incredibles. Another kick-butt mom, Helen is an interesting mix of more modern sensibilities that women can do anything that guys can do, while still having some of those old-school classic mom desires of wanting to take care of the kids, fill the house with love, and trying to keep everyone under control. She doesn't get as much of a focus as her husband done in the first and better of the 2 films, but it's enough for us to agree that she's got a lot of good mom vibes. The main reason I didn't put her on this list mostly comes down to the fact that most fans don't really view her as a mom as much as they view her as a MILF. This being encouraged by the movie doesn't really help matters, and that's all I'm going to be saying on that fact. And my number 1 mom in media is Mrs. Bribsby from The Secret of NIMH. It's kind of amazing how I always go back to the works of Don Bluth, isn't it? The Secret of NIMH is Bluth's directional debut to the silver screen, and while based off a book, there's enough differences in this film to leave it with an impact all of its own. In particular, when we're talking about just how good of a mother Mrs. Bribsby is. A widowed field mouse, Bribsby here is the very definition of an old school mother. Shy, demure, focused entirely on her children, while letting her husband Jonathan take care of most other things. Throughout the film, we often hear things about how great her husband was and what he's done for the world. This goes to the fact that we actually never learn Mrs. Bribsby's first name, with her only ever going by her last name and sometimes even being referred to as Mrs. Jonathan Bribsby. What makes her number 1 on the list, though, is what happens in the film as one of her children, Timothy, gets sick, and after that she will move heaven and earth to help him. This includes venturing out to get medicine and dealing with a cat, running straight for a tractor that's going to plow through the field that her house is in, meeting up with an ancient owl, a predator of her kind, and even dealing with the rats of NIMH themselves to do what she can for her son. And that's what distinguishes her from the rest of the moms on this list. Whereas we got a lot of moms who will fight for their kids or will risk their lives for them, a lot of them already had that kind of personality, often being outgoing and adventurous. Mrs. Bribsby, on the other hand, is the kind of mother who will never ever do any of these things if it wasn't for the fact that her child life was in danger, pushing herself past every single fear she's got and going through hell and back to keep him safe. And if that's not a sign of a fantastic mom, I do not know what is. But that's just my thoughts on the top 10 moms in media, and just a casual glance through Google for my research showed just how many people prefer some of the moms from a few decades back when it comes to moms in media. But is there any particular ones that you thought would have been good on this list, or do you disagree with me on any particular point? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one. With all that said, I hope I've done a good job to entertain you, and I'll do my best to do so again in the future. Hopefully you'll follow along with my content by subscribing and doing all those other things that gives us YouTubers life. If you wish to support me a bit more, I do have a Patreon where you can get access to bonus content. But until next time, stay frosty.